integrated and effectuated. Are you sticking with the same strategy? You believe it's working?
Yes, we're in the early days of the execution of that strategy, but certainly the early evidence indicates that this strategy is succeeding.
Because there are, I don't need to tell you, there's several analysts who look at Kobani, if it falls, would be the third city on the Syrian-Turkish border to do so. Anbar is now 80% controlled by ISIS. They are 15 miles away from Baghdad. If you take that outer perimeter from Baghdad and go east, it's an area of control of about 350 miles. That doesn't read to many analysts like success. Why does it look like success to this administration?
Well, I can cite, we've gone through this a few times before, that there are specific episodes where the use of military force has succeeded in beating back an ISIL advance or stopping the siege of a vulnerable humanitarian target. We have seen that that our strikes have had an impact on targets in Syria, that the ability of ISIL to command and control their forces has been affected by the airstrikes. At the same time, I don't think anybody has sought to leave you or anyone else with the impression that these kinds of airstrikes were going to dramatically reverse the situation on the battlefield overnight. They won't. We've been pretty candid about the fact that this is a longer-term proposition, and it's predicated on something that necessarily does take a long time, which is building up the capacity and capability of forces on the ground to take the fight to ISIL. The President's made a strategic decision that they will not be American boots on the ground in a combat role taking the fight to ISIL. But what we can do is we can build up the capacity of Iraq's security forces, and we can build up the capacity of Syrian opposition fighters to take the fight to ISIL. That is a core component of this strategy, and until that aspect of the strategy is ramped up, that is a necessary component of the strategy that will allow us to see more significant results on the battlefield. But the aspects of the strategy that have been implemented so far have been characterized by having an impact on ISIL in a negative way for them.
To follow up on Roberta's question, does the President regard Kobani as strategically significant and worthy of defense?
Well, in terms of our broader strategy is to ensure that ISIL cannot operate in a virtual safe haven in Syria. And so to the extent that ISIL is trying to carve out a safe haven in Syria in the midst of all this violence, we want to take airstrikes that can degrade their ability to do exactly that. That ultimately, at some point, is going to require some forces on the ground who can take the fight to them. More broadly, we have sought, where possible, to try to avoid terrible humanitarian situations from occurring. So I talked about the situations at Sinjar Mountain and Amerli in Iraq. Our capability to do that in Syria is limited by the fact that we don't have ground forces that can follow up on coalition airstrikes.
But what Roberta's getting at is that we should not interpret the increased volume of airstrikes in and around Kobani as a strategic decision on behalf of this government and its coalition to protect it at all costs. That it is so strategically important that you don't want it to fall, and therefore that is why the airstrikes have stepped up in number and ferocity.
Well, again, of course we don't want the town to fall. We are very concerned, as we've said many times, about the citizens who live there and the citizens who are threatened by ISIL. Again, the fact that they are encroaching on this city and seeking to take it over is just further evidence that ISIL is an extremist organization that is willing to perpetrate terrible acts of violence that are worthy of global condemnation. So we certainly do not want the town to fall. At the same time, our capacity to prevent that town from falling is limited by the fact that airstrikes can only do so much.